The UK is facing rising levels of ill health.
The chronic disease escalation is primarily related to food intake. There's no question about it.
There's growing concern about some of the food we eat.
We're consuming too much ultra-processed food. People consuming more ultra-processed food have higher risk of disease and death.
Panaroma investigates the possible links between artificial sweeteners and serious illness.
The higher the dose that was given, the higher the numbers of tumours that we observed.
Exclusive new evidence linking food additives to cancer.
We observed significant associations between emulsifier intake and increased risk of cancer overall.
And we ask, are regulators doing enough to keep our food safe?
This really is a future time bomb. It's a complete disaster, and we're sleepwalking into it.
This is Amy. And this is Nancy. They're 24 and identical twins.
That's there, so you're 160.5. Lovely. Step forward.
So Amy and Nancy, what we want to do is to look at how food processing impacts your health.
They're taking part in a test to explore the impact of ultra-processed food on their health.
What we're going to be doing today is a lot of different tests to look at your baseline health measures. And then what you're going to do is for 2 weeks, Nancy, you're going to be doing the unprocessed diet, and Amy, you're going to be eating the ultra-processed diet. Then we're going to get you back here, and then we're going to do the same test again and look at how these different foods have impacted your health.
Ultra-processed foods are hugely popular, from ready meals to some bread, crisps and snacks. Across Europe, ultra-processed food makes up about a quarter of the diet. But here in the UK, the figures are much higher.
Ultra-processed food accounts for more than 50% of our energy intake in the UK across adults, and it's an even bigger problem in children. So it accounts for about 65% of our energy intake for children. This is actually increasing at an alarming rate.
Ultra-processed food is relatively cheap, convenient, and can have a longer shelf life. It's mass-produced, and its nutritional content is often altered.
We believe ultra-processed foods are having an unfavourable effect on our health because the act of processing foods breaks down the structure of the foods. Often ultra-processed foods have very little fibre in them, or the fibre is removed.
And ultra-processed food often contains chemical additives.
Many of these ingredients most people won't have heard of. But what we don't know is how all of these different chemicals might interact together in terms of our health.
Because Amy and Nancy are identical twins, it's easier to compare how their bodies react to the food they eat. Their diets will contain exactly the same amount of calories, nutrients, fat, sugar and fibre. But only Amy will be eating the ultra-processed food containing chemical additives.
I do eat some processed foods just out of convenience, but I do love lots of fresh foods and have quite a healthy diet, I think. So I think it is going to be a bit of a shift.
There are many reasons for chronic ill health, like smoking, drinking too much and lack of exercise. We already know too much salt, fat and sugar in our diet can be bad for us. Now there's an increasing focus on ultra-processed food.
My name is Tim Spector. I'm a professor of epidemiology at King's College London.
In the last decade, the evidence has been slowly growing that ultra-processed food is harmful for us in ways we hadn't thought. We're talking about whole varieties of cancers, we're talking about heart disease, strokes, dementia. Many of these products may have 20 chemicals, and there can be emulsifiers, preservatives, artificial sweeteners, which have negative effects on our body.
One of the most controversial chemical additives, often used in ultra-processed food, is the sweetener, aspartame. 200 times sweeter than sugar, it's used in thousands of products often marketed as low-calorie. There have been questions about its safety over the last 2 decades. In 2006, scientists in Italy began studying aspartame.
I'm Daniele Mandrioli. I'm the director of the Cesare Maltoni Cancer Research Center of the Ramazzini Institute. We gave mice and rats aspartame with a human equivalent exposure. It was the largest study ever performed on aspartame. Our findings was that aspartame was capable of inducing a number of cancer in different organs.
Although the experiment was on rodents, the Ramazzini scientists were concerned aspartame might also be harmful to humans.
The higher the dose that was given, the higher the numbers of tumors that we observed. These are all cancer cells that are invading the liver, nervous system tumors, memory cancer, kidney, leukemia.
Since then, aspartame has been studied many times. Some scientists raised similar concerns, while others questioned the quality of the Ramazzini studies and said there was nothing to worry about. In 2013, the European Food Safety Authority agreed, saying aspartame was safe.
My name is Eric Millstone, and I am an emeritus professor of science policy at the University of Sussex.
Professor Millstone reviewed all the research the regulator had considered.
I produced and published a very detailed analysis of each of the studies.
He came to the conclusion that there was a link between how research was funded and its findings.
Of the studies that seemed to show harm, I think every single one of them was funded by a non-commercial independent source.
3/4 of those independent studies found an association between aspartame and harm. But Professor Millstone found research funded by makers of aspartame came to a very different conclusion.
About 90% of the reassuring studies were funded by large chemical corporations that manufacture and sell aspartame. So there's a pattern there that suggests the industry designs and conducts studies that provide reassuring evidence. I saw that as an expression of a very profound and very dangerous bias.
Although ruled safe by many regulators, there is a growing body of evidence of potential links between the sweetener and serious illness.
I am Dr. Mathilde Touvier. I am the head of the Nutritional Epidemiology Research Team in the University Sorbonne Paris Nord.
Dr. Touvier is leading one of the world's biggest studies into food additives. It's called Nutrinet Santé, and for 14 years, Dr. Touvier and her team have been publishing regular reports based on the health and eating habits of 174,000 people.
We have 24-hour dietary records during which they tell us all the food, the beverages and so on that they are eating.
She's been looking at the possible impact of aspartame on human health.
Regarding artificial sweeteners and aspartame, we did 2 major studies so far. We first showed an association between artificial sweeteners intake and notably aspartame and increased risk of cancer.
Dr. Touvier's findings don't prove aspartame causes cancer, but they do suggest the more aspartame you consume, the more likely you are to develop cancer, as well as other diseases.
We observed associations between artificial sweeteners as a whole, and notably aspartame, with cardiovascular diseases and more specifically cerebral vascular diseases, which are mainly stroke.
The World Health Organization has recently advised that, although there isn't conclusive evidence, it's concerned long-term use of sweeteners like aspartame may increase the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart diseases, and mortality. A working group from the organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer is meeting to examine aspartame's possible links to cancer later this month. The US-based Calorie Control Council, which represents the global sweetener industry, says the French study should be reviewed with extreme caution, as it's based on self-reported data which may be unreliable. It also says it strongly disagrees with the World Health Organization's conclusion on aspartame's potential health impacts. Amy and Nancy are a week into their ultra-processed food test.
For breakfast this morning, I had a quinoa porridge with berries on top, and it's done a really good job at keeping me energised and full.
So it's the end of the day now, and I've got a bit of a headache, to be honest. So yeah, ending the day, still hungry, feeling a bit sort of rubbish, and yeah, a bit of a headache.
Dr. Berry is checking in with the twins to discuss how they're getting on.
Lots of the things that you've just described about your headache all point to the fact that you're probably having a dip in blood sugar that happens about 2 to 4 hours after people consume really heavily processed, refined carbohydrates.
As well as being highly processed, Amy's food also contains chemical additives.
So this is a mousse made with fruit puree and only 73 calories.
Yeah, you'd think that would be a healthy option.
Oh my goodness.
Pork gelatin, glucose fructose syrup, acidity regulator, citric acid, sodium hydroxide, modified maize starch.
There's a term we use called the health halo, where you have packaging says high in fibre or low in sugar, low in salt, plant-based, all of these kind of magic words that make people think, wow, these are really healthy. If anything ever says low, reduced or no, I'd always be a bit suspicious, because how else have they therefore made that food taste great?
Even many everyday foods like sliced bread can contain ingredients no home cook would recognise.
Preservatives, palm oil, caramelised sugar, esters of mono and diglycerides of fatty acids. Yeah, it's shocking. So many things I've never heard of.
And there's one ingredient the twins keep seeing again and again.
And then the emulsifiers again. We've seen that a few times, haven't we?
Emulsifiers are essentially a glue. They stick components together so that they have a good mouthfeel and they don't fall apart in your mouth or on the plate. So here we have carboxymethylcellulose, CMC, which is one of the commonest emulsifiers used in the food industry. And I'm just going to demonstrate what happens when you just add water to it, and it very rapidly becomes like a glue, a stodgy mass that sticks everything together.
The food industry uses around 60 different emulsifiers, often to enhance the appearance, texture, and shelf life of ultra-processed foods. Some are naturally occurring, others are chemically produced.
It's found in an incredible number of our foods, and they are potentially harmful.
Dr. Touvier's study has also been looking at emulsifiers. Panaroma has been given exclusive access to her findings. They're yet to be verified by peer review, but she says they're concerning.
We observed significant associations between emulsifier intake and increased risk of cancer overall, and breast cancer notably, but also with cardiovascular diseases.
10 years ago, a report funded by the European Commission said the consumption of chemical emulsifiers by UK adults sometimes exceeded safe limits. Some children were consuming even higher levels, yet no action was taken by regulators.
In population, especially children, are above the acceptable daily intakes. It's really something we should be concerned about.
It's pretty horrific that so many children are affected. It's even worse to realise that no one has done anything about it.
At this party, the children are largely eating unprocessed food, but their parents are still worried.
If there is evidence that there's links to cancer, it's really scary. It begs the question, why is nobody actually bothering to look at that?
They're little children. They cannot be exposed to those things. Sitting and worrying, that's how it makes me feel.
I think it's outrageous, to be honest, because you get them in for snacks, you get them in to give to the children when they come in from school and they're hungry. We should be protecting our next generation, not exposing them to harmful chemicals in their food.
In England, Wales and Northern Ireland, food safety is regulated by the Food Standards Agency, the FSA. It says it's about to launch a public consultation on some emulsifiers. There's growing concern the impact of ultra-processed food on younger people is already being felt.
Hello, Sada.
So, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah.
Hunida discovered she had type 2 diabetes when she was just 31.
Not anyone as young as me has had diabetes in my family, so when I was the first one in the young generation, it was quite a shock, you know. I am aware medically of the seriousness of diabetes and what it can do to you long term.
She's one of 4.3 million people in the UK diagnosed with diabetes. Rates among the under 40s are growing faster here than anywhere in the world. Diabetes levels at Dr. Sadra's Slough practice are above the national average. His patients face a range of risk factors.
In this practice, we've got 25% of adults are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. This is very worrying. It is very concerning. In the last 12 months, I've had more than 100 new diabetics being diagnosed. We have 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds who have been diagnosed. I'm finding patients who are younger with certain cancers. That's how bad things are getting.
Dr. Sadra is clear on what he thinks the cause is.
The chronic disease escalation is primarily related to food intake. There's no question about it.
As well as the ingredients in our food, many scientists are worried about chemicals in some of the packaging it comes in, particularly bisphenol A, or BPA for short. It's used in some ready meal plastic trays, bottles and takeaway containers.
BPA gets into our food because it leaches out from the plastic containers, and it's increased if you increase the temperature of the plastic, as can happen on a hot day, or particularly if you put it in a microwave.
A review of more than 1,000 studies suggested high levels of BPA were linked to cancer and infertility, with particular concerns about the impact on pregnancies.
It disrupts our hormonal pathways. It's been associated with increased rates of miscarriage, stillbirth, or malformations in the fetus.
The European regulator was so concerned that in April 2023, it updated its guidance, dramatically reducing safe levels for human consumption. The UK's regulator, the Food Standards Agency, gets advice on chemicals in food from the Committee on Toxicity. It took a different view. It's chaired by Professor Alan Bubis, seen here speaking at a scientific conference.
I'm a member of a number of science advisory boards.
Alan Bubis is an emeritus professor. Recently, Professor Bubis and some of his colleagues have been arguing that the authorities ought not to be focusing on the potential risk that chemicals might cause to reproductive systems.
A series of reports co-authored by Professor Bubis have downplayed the risks of BPA. The most recent paper said that it was not plausible that the amount of BPA we're currently exposed to could cause us harm. The paper also said the professor had no personal relationships that might influence his conclusions. But he didn't declare in that paper his relationship with an organisation called the International Life Sciences Institute, known as ILSI.
I'm Dr. Sarah Steele. I'm a Senior Research Associate at the University of Cambridge in Global Public Health. The International Life Sciences Institute, which most people call ILSI, was set up in 1978. They have multiple branches around the world. They're a truly global body.
By working with experts...
ILSI's glossy videos spell out its mission.
ILSI is a non-profit charitable organization that works for the health of the public.
Hundreds of scientists work with the Institute worldwide. It says it encourages collaborations between academics and industry.
They kind of say that they produce science for the public good.
It's who we are, and it is...
But ILSI gets much of its funding from some of the world's largest food and chemical companies.
Clarity.
There's been a large number of multinational corporations who funded ILSI. Big food, environment, chemical, those kinds of multinational corporations.
In 2012, the European Food Safety Authority was so worried about potential conflicts of interest, it insisted anyone associated with ILSI either had to resign from it or leave the regulator. 3 years later, the World Health Organization also distanced itself from ILSI.
They're promoting industry-favourable positions, but not calling themselves the industry players. And that, for me, is really concerning.
But here in the UK, the Food Standards Agency allows Professor Bubis, an unpaid board member and former Vice President of ILSI Europe, to chair the key advisory Committee on Toxicity.
I think it's entirely inappropriate that the chairman of the Committee on Toxicity is so closely linked to an organisation promoting the interests of the chemical and food industries.
More than half the members of the Committee on Toxicity have recent links to the food or chemicals industries. And last year, it disagreed with the European regulators' proposals to cut the safe level of BPA, criticising the regulators' approach to the evidence. That means the safe level in the UK is now 20,000 times higher than in Europe.
They have dismissed the arguments in favour of precaution and are not endorsing a proposal for cutting the permitted levels of BPA in food packaging materials. And that represents a danger to consumers in this country.
Currently, the Food Standards Agency says BPA poses no risk to health. But it says evaluation is ongoing. Over the past 10 years, the Committee on Toxicity hasn't supported a single restriction on the use of any chemical additive in our food.
The UK's Committee on Toxicity is supposed to help protect public health. The judgments that it makes rarely serve to protect public health and more typically protect the commercial interests of chemical and food companies.
Professor Bubis says his advice isn't slanted to favour industry, and he's always been totally committed to conducting and identifying the very best scientific research, whoever is funding it. He says he's always been open and transparent about organisations he works with, recuses himself when there's a potential conflict of interest, and that his research is independently scrutinised through peer review. The Food Standards Agency says it has a clear code of conduct for declarations of interest, and it has no evidence bias has affected the Committee on Toxicity's opinions or decisions made by the FSA. It says it's vital it gets expert advice from people across the food system. ILSI says it works in the interest of science, not industry, and evaluates any conflicts of interest, ensuring that research remains independent of any companies that may contribute funding for research. Twins Amy and Nancy have finished their 2-week food test. They've eaten diets matched for calories, nutrients, sugar, salt, fat and fibre. The only difference has been the way Amy's food has been made.
Are you interested to find out how you got on?
Yeah, we don't know anything, so we're excited to find out.
Amy, you were on the ultra-processed food diet that was exactly equivalent to the same diet that Nancy was on, which was the whole food, unprocessed diet. But your results were really quite different to your sisters. They were far worse. Your blood fat levels actually went up. Your lipids, which are markers of heart disease, they were increased. Your blood sugar was noticeably worse. You actually gained weight, nearly a kilogram, and you actually lost weight.
It's a bit scary, isn't it, after only 2 weeks to see those sorts of results?
So just imagine what that would be over 20 years.
After 2 weeks on the ultra-processed diet, any impact on Amy's health will be fully reversible. But the results are in line with a growing body of evidence linking chemical additives and ultra-processing to serious health consequences.
You're much more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. The changes we saw in your blood fats, these blood lipid levels, are associated with increased risk of heart disease and strokes later in life. So really, it's all bad news to be moving in that direction.
The government has ordered a review of the evidence on ultra-processed foods. It will report in the summer.
We already have the most obese children in Europe. That means more type 2 diabetes, more cancers, more heart disease, more misery, more mental illness. This really is a future time bomb. It's a complete disaster, and we're sleepwalking into it, and it's extremely frightening.
There are now dozens of scientific studies warning of the dangers of diets high in ultra-processed food. In a decade that's seen a rapid rise in chronic illnesses, is it time to take stronger action?
A race against time as the scam interceptors try to stop one woman transferring all her money via a banking app. They can see it happening online in front of their eyes. Next.